Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sales Syndicate podcast, episode 43. We're fast approaching a full year's worth of recordings, which is mad. But I'm joined by Jack today. I'll hand over to him to introduce himself before we run through the topics. So over to you, Jack.
Great. Thanks for having me on, Jamie and Selligence. My name is Jack Neicho. I'm a senior account executive at Salesloft. I've been in sales for 6 years now, 2 years as an SDR at a previous company. I then joined Salesloft as their first SDR in Europe with the infamous Tom Boston, and have gone on then to the very traditional sales route of account executive. And yeah, it's been great to be a part of Salesloft's journey from being one of the original 10 opening up the European market all the way to being almost 150 of us now in London. But yeah, run SDRs and AEs of London, the communities, because I love giving back to other salespeople. And I have my own podcast as well called No Big Deal, where we have top reps on to discuss big deals that they've closed.
I'd imagine everyone's heard of Salesloft, but just give us a layman's term sentence on what Salesloft is, if anyone wants to go and check them out.
Yeah, great. Good idea. So Salesloft is a revenue workflow platform. Anyone that's facing challenges like they don't have a repeatable sales process to generate pipeline, they're unable to coach their teams effectively, they find it difficult to forecast and understand at-risk deals, then Salesloft is going to be a great partner for you to be able to pull on all of those levers. Increase pipeline, increase your win percentage in deals, increase your deal sizes, and reduce your sales cycle.
You can tell you've said that quite a few times before. That was a very concise description there. And you mentioned as well SDRs of London, AEs of London, which again, for those people who are listening to a sales podcast, they've probably heard of those communities as well, along with No Big Deal, which is, like you said, your podcast. It's not very often that I have another podcast host on, so it could be nice for me to sit back a little bit more and hand over to you. And the topic we're going to run through is, I guess, aligned with some of the stuff you were saying there about Salesloft, but it's going to be how to manage a deal process effectively, start to finish. How do you get the most out of it in terms of efficacy and in optimal results, basically? So when we're talking about that, how to manage a deal process effectively, I think we've had a quick chat and we're going to break it down in the stages that you follow as part of your deal process, from the introductory call all the way through to onboarding, kickoff, and I guess lessons learned as well, and everything in between. So let's get started. So let's hypothetically say Selligence is an opportunity for you, or you've got Selligence in your sights. Stage one, where are you starting?
Cool, great. So stage one is going to be discovery, right? You're going to try and understand as much as you can about the business, especially the three key areas that I want are going to be the business strategies, the initiatives driving those, and the challenges of those as well. Now, something I always try and do, whether that's a meeting booked by an SDR, I've booked that meeting, or it's come inbound, is to go into that meeting with some form of hypothesis about the challenges they may be experiencing based on who they sell to, how they sell it, and why they sell it. And then importantly with that, I can be critiqued and be like, Jack, you're completely wrong. Or Jack, well done, you hit the nail on the head. And then I can dig into those areas. Something I've done a lot more this year is when that meeting is booked for me, let's say it's come inbound or booked by an SDR, let's say that meeting is booked in a week's time, I will actively reach out to those people and try and get in some form of introductory calls before we eventually have the demonstration. Now, I sell to the commercial segment, meaning I can target any business up to 750 employees. Generally, when meetings are booked for me or I'm booking meetings, the prospect is going to expect some form of platform demonstration. Now, what I've really learned is by asking for that initial call before they have that, I can really go in with a strong hypothesis about how we could help. And I can really deliver like a proof of value based on this is what you told me is the key strategy for the business. These are the initiatives to get you there. These are the challenges you face. And then make a really catered demonstration of 20 minutes long of the specific areas in Salesloft to help you get there.
And I guess if your hypothesis doesn't quite hit the mark, that's also beneficial, isn't it? Because at the point at which they say, right, that's not quite right, this is actually where we think. Like, they're going to give you some sort of feedback where you can go, okay, great. I can, adjust the demo. I can revisit it with more information, which is, I guess, going to help play into that like consultative approach.
Absolutely. If anything, I am going into this meeting hoping that I'm wrong. Even if sometimes as well, Jamie, let's say, for example, there might be 3 stakeholders sitting on that call. Now, I sell to salespeople, right? So I might have someone that joins the initial call or later calls that is going to be someone in sales operations, someone in marketing, and someone in sales. Now, the important part as well is to consider the person in marketing is going to have very different strategies and initiatives that they're trying to get to this year and next year versus someone in sales operations, RevOps, IT, whatever it is. And the important thing is when you're coming into those, you can ask them, okay, how does this align with what you envisage as the business goals? So a question I always really like to ask is, what are the strategies that are always discussed in all hands meetings? That always gets like a really good, because then you get the idea of like, generally in all hands it's run by the CEO, right? Like, what does the CEO always talk about? Okay, the CEO always talks about, we need to increase ARR by X percentage. We need to get the new funding round. And then you can tie in the strategies and initiatives to get to that like overarching headline.
Yeah, no, that's quite a tactical play as well, because when you match up your solution to one of the strategic objectives, that senior, let's hypothetically say head of sales or director of sales, is then able to go back to the business and say, look, I've been working on a bit of a potential sort of new tool for us that will actually help tick those 3 things that you keep talking about off, and I'm happy to manage that, and I'm happy to go through this process, and that's going to look great for you going back to the business with something constructive.
Exactly. And that's why discovery is so important before you eventually show any form of the platform. Because the worst demos, they just say, this is, okay, let's say a cadence or a sequence. If anyone doesn't know what that is, that's like one of the main elements of Salesloft. That is a step process of phone, email, and LinkedIn touches over a set amount of days to engage customers or book meetings. If I were to go into a demo and go, this is a cadence, this is what it does, this is how you send an email, these are some insights you get on it, that's not that exciting. If I understand what the strategies, initiatives, and the challenges are, I say, the challenge you told me is this. This is how this specific part of Salesloft solves for that. This is how it completes this initiative. And then this is how it ties into that strategy. Immediately, they envisage their own specific use cases if you've not even found those out yet. And we call this value selling. And this is how we're coached at Salesloft to sell.
Yeah, and I think it's loosely, we've heard this from Jiminy as well. I think we spoke with Nick Butler. He called it goal and trigger selling. It's essentially the same thing. You find a strategic goal in his case, and that was the triggering opportunity for him then to tie his value proposition to that. And I think speaking of the Butlers, I think Becky Butler's quite heavily involved in the community side of things for AEs of London as well. We have got Becky joining us in a few weeks. So go and check out Jiminy as well as the Butler siblings. That was a great episode with Nick. So that discovery and that intro process, how long have you found like that takes in terms of, do you take as long as it takes for you to get all the information, or is it you will set yourself, right, I've got 2 weeks to execute this?
I think worst case scenario, or like what I'll really try and push for, is at least 2 discovery calls before I present any form of hypothesis about, or like really structured hypothesis based on the information that they've given me. I'm looking for at least 2 discovery calls from hopefully 2 different departments, someone in marketing, someone in sales, someone in sales operations. Otherwise you really get fed narrow down, like, these are my specific challenges. Yeah. Now, when you get that, you can present back the business case or, what we heard basically back into your that first 10 minutes of your demo. And then in the rest of the demonstration call, you're going to, show the areas of the platform that you have. And critically, you're going to leave, let's say, 15 minutes at the end in order to schedule next steps and get some feedback and answer some questions. So I try and think of like the call in 3 stages, 15 minutes of what we heard. The second part is going to be mainly showing the platform for 30 minutes, and then 15 minutes at the end to discuss next steps. And that's the most critical part of deal management and deal process, is getting next steps. Like, your deal dies when you're having to email contacts to try and schedule what the next step is. And importantly as well, like, our job more than ever now, and everyone I speak to, even my own podcast, like the role of the account executive is really moving towards the project manager. Like, on all deals, it's like, how are you coaching your buyers throughout the process, but also making sure that you're pulling in the right people internally to match with their side to also deliver value. So I think when we discussed this before, and I've got that prescriptive, like, sort of 7-stage, okay, most basic form of sales process is going to be discovery call, demo. Maybe I'll need to demo to the wider team, like the actual sales reps, to drive adoption. Next is going to be delivering ROI, commercials, and onboarding. Then it's going to be, okay, legal process, finalize partnership, kick you off in onboarding. That's like best case scenario. But obviously in there, I'm always thinking like triggers and instinctual triggers to think like, okay, actually, based on what they told me, they're concerned about adoption. So I'm going to bring in my onboarding manager, Rishi, onto the call for him to tell the customer or prospect about how we onboard customers, rather than me going, don't worry about onboarding. Do you know what I mean? It's great. All of these things, etc. Or, something that I always really try and leverage is getting a customer reference in front of the prospect. Maybe they're doing a wider evaluation. We have lots of customers that have gone and explored competitors, even used competitors of ours, and won't be like, okay, I'd love to have a candid conversation with them about what it was like using X versus Y, or what were the impacts of Salesloft over a year period. And I think that's really beneficial, rather than it coming from someone internal at Salesloft telling them that.
Yeah, and that, because if we sort of wind it back slightly to the introductory and then the demo, that sort of, was it 45 minutes? You were saying that sort of hypothesis pitch, whatever you want to call it. We've got it down here as sort of demo, but 45 minutes. That 15 minutes at the end, like you said, that mutual action plan, I think Rory at Trumpet calls it, is essentially, look, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I need you to do in order for us to progress this. And it's really interesting, the stuff you said about project management, because I've had a recording last week, and the guy, he's an AE, but he used to work in project management. So he introduced project charters to his proof of concept process, and they've closed 100% of the proof of concepts. And he thinks a lot of it is to do with that project charter, which kind of, like, as he explained it, and when I Googled it after, because I'm not a project manager, it was kind of like a brief or a scope of what the project's going to entail, almost like the company, they were getting briefed by this company who asked for a POC, and it's like, this is what we're going to do for you, this is the process, and then they just work through it, very, very openly. And I think that's I've heard it numerous times, like between 5 and 10 times in the last few weeks, where people keep saying project management. And I think that's going to be a massive shift in the next 6 to 12 months, where sales reps are just relied on even more to effectively manage that process, which is a very, very interesting shift. So it's interesting to hear your take on it as well.
And I think about it as well, what we'll shift to is, deal management is such a great topic, because I think the easier you can make it and more prescriptive to buy from you and buy your software, the more likelihood that they're going to go with you. If you're sort of umming and ahhing, being like, okay, maybe what the next steps are, or going, just, you get back to me if you want to decide, rather than going, okay, upfront contract with the prospect at the end of the call for 15 minutes. Based on our conversation today, I've put together this rough idea of the process that we're going on, but I'm actually going to add in a couple of steps here or actually remove this. So maybe you don't need the team demo, but maybe you need an introduction into the sales operations team to go through some integrations with them. Maybe you think they need help with their go-to market strategy, so you're going to introduce them to a partner and you're going to join that call. So I think leaving yourself as much time as possible at the end to have that upfront contract with the customer, and make sure that that is a really visible thing that you're sharing with the prospect afterwards. So I would always screenshot that and put that in my follow-up email to be like, these is where we are, and timestamp the dates and make sure that people are assigned to specific calls that they have as well.
And we spoke about Rory before we jumped on, but do you guys use Trumpet at Salesloft?
Potentially, yeah. We do, yeah.
Because I think I feel like I feel like I'm whoring myself out, but I keep talking about Trumpet on podcast episodes. But yeah, it's all of this like project management and these mutual action plans and being very open and transparent and making the buying journey as seamless as possible. It helps all that. So go and check it out. But now when we're talking about, if we jump back into the sort of process, the multi-threading aspect of it, do you actively look to increase the number of people that you're bringing into that multi-thread in terms of like, right, I've got someone from marketing and sales. Would you then actively go, look, would you like to get the CS team on? Would you like to get these guys on to see if we can build something a bit more broad or a bit more widespread for you?
Definitely. Like if I'm uni-threaded in deals with like less than or 2 or 3 stakeholders, that is a big red flag for me and my manager coming in to be like, Jack, who are you speaking to? Oh, I've got the SDR manager and the VP of sales. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And most importantly as well, Jamie, more than anything else now, is that given this year is harder to sell than in any of all of my sales career, albeit not that I'm the most experienced rep ever, I'm not only competing for maybe sales and marketing budget, but when it eventually goes up to the CFO and CEO, I'm competing with budget from every single other department more than ever. So I need to make sure I'm multi-threaded across the organization, so I'm delivering value and I can make sure that the challenge that we're solving is prioritized as highly as possible across the business. And I think importantly here, my big best practice would be is don't ask for an introduction and hey, can we involve customer success? Do your research in LinkedIn, find that person's name and give value as to why they would find that interesting with a use case. If there isn't a use case for customer success, don't just pitch them it, be like, hey, based on our discussion, I found that Jamie Pagan at Selligence, your head of customer success, I think should be involved for this reason. Would you be happy to introduce me to them?
Yeah, almost you're not putting the ball in their court saying, do you think it'd be worthwhile? You're coming to them again, looping back to that more consultative approach of, based on our experience and the research I've done, I think it would be very, very valuable for Jamie to jump on the call and hear us out. Wicked. Okay, so
as well, Jamie, there to just jump on. If they are happy to introduce you, that's a really good initial sign that you have a champion and not a coach in your deal.
Yeah, that's a nice one actually, because people always talk about these champions. I think that's quite a nice positive signal, let's call it, to look out for. If they're willing to introduce you and bring more people into the process, then at the end of the day, they're maintaining their image internally, and they're not just going to pass you on and invite people on if they think it's a waste of people's times, because they'll quite quickly lose that internal respect of, oh, fucking hell, he's getting us involved in another deal process again. Here we go. So that's a good positive signal to look out for. That's a good tip. Now, in terms of that demo to team, that we've got that down, do you mean demo to team in terms of not just the multi-thread in terms of head of sales, head of CS, head of marketing? Would you demo to the end users? Is that what you're saying? Or do you mean team as in just company, wider company?
Team for me is demoing to the end users. I think what I've learned actually is that, especially, this might be more specific with me, with who I sell to, and the sales people that I sell to. But I've often found that if I can create groundswell amongst the users that would be using the platform, that's really helped me to drive urgency, one, in the deal, and secondly, get buy-in from someone from the team rather than the manager just purchasing something for them. Now, what that has meant is normally actually the sales management are like, actually, do you know what? That's a good idea, Jack. Like, let's get them on board. And how great is it for me thinking that in their next team meeting, every single one of those users, because I mean, you're very, 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 very rarely going to show Salesloft to a sales rep and they go, nah, I don't need that. What? It tells me what to do and syncs data back into my CRM and coaches me and I can forecast and I can be a better rep. Yeah, I don't need that. Do you know what I mean? So I think if I can get in front of all of the users, show them those specific use cases about how they use them, you know, a day in the life type scenario, then it only helps my business case and drives urgency. Because if they're going into every team meeting, like I say, going, when are we getting Salesloft? When are we getting Salesloft? You know.
Yeah, I like that groundswell phrase. That's going to make a great LinkedIn clip. But yeah, groundswell, I like that in terms of, because it's always those little voices that you keep hearing internally that are going to help, you know, persuade people. And ultimately the person, CFO with the budget, if he keeps hearing the same name mentioned, he's thinking, right, well, we've actually got pretty good buy-in from, you know, a good proportion of the team. Chances are if everyone's bought in, we're going to get some ROI here. Maybe this is a wise investment.
And also really think, and, you know, more in enterprise sales than specifically with me in commercial, you want to map out two things. You want to map out the org chart and the power chart. And sometimes, you know, in bigger enterprise companies, you'll get some potentially low-level person maybe, but they've been there for 20 years. They might have a huge amount of influence because they've been at the company for a long time. Potentially, it's also the case, you know, you can go and demo to sales reps. If you've got the top performing sales rep, AE, who's also very loud and a big influencer, always yamming about it, that's even better as well. So you're trying to think of like, okay, who in the team has influence for them? And we've had it in scenarios before, you know, where like I've done deal reviews with my colleagues and they've gone, you know, we did this and maybe it backfired and the influencer didn't get sold on it. So it's going to work like both ways as well.
Yeah, but you know, the influencer, let's say, look, if the influencer's not bought in, the chances are it's going to progress through the process. CS are going to get it if they do decide to purchase, and then
you're going to get bad adoption.
Yeah, exactly. So it might be painful up front, but it's good in the long run. But no, I like that org chart and power chart. That's a nice thing, or at least you have an org chart and you put stars and asterisks next to the ones that you think are those the power buyers. Yeah, that's a nice one as well.
And a great question to also ask as well is like, you know, who potentially internally is going to block the purchase of this? You know, who's going to see something like this and go, I don't think we need that. Like, we need to get in front of those people as well. Like, who in your team as an end user is adverse to using new technology?
And that's quite, I guess that's probably quite well received, because I'd imagine most sales reps are afraid of asking that because they think, I've got to avoid those people because that's going to make my life more difficult. Whereas if you tackle it up front and head on, probably the buyer's going to almost have, apologies if you can hear the dog in the background. The buyer's probably going to respect you more for actually just saying, look, let's tackle it head on.
Yeah, 100%.
Now, ROI and commercials is the next stage we've got on. So do you want to just run us through how you handle that part of the process?
Yeah, sure. So with the value I'm always getting, let's say in the strategy and the initiatives, like you're trying to find out, okay, let's say as an example, someone I'm selling to is trying to expand across the US, or they have a strategy to increase seller efficiency. I'm trying to always find metrics tied to that. Okay, our win rate at the moment is 25%. It needs to be 30%. Now, always when you're trying to get those metrics, then you can use metrics to implicate more pain and challenges to not solving the thing. But importantly, it helps you to create a return of investment for the buyer with what they would likely receive, you know, an increase in my case of opportunities or closed won revenue. Now, importantly, now as well, more than ever, of course, we used to do this before, like when you're presenting to a CFO trying to get sign off, you're going to need a pretty foolproof business case of one, the cost of inaction, and secondly, the return of investment that you're going to get. So with ours, with Salesloft, there's a lot more about value, more opportunities, more revenue, etc. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with my champion and I'll present them back If I'm allowed to go and present that to the CFO, of course I will, but I want to arm my champion as best as possible so he or she can talk through that business case and sell it internally as well. And then normally what I'm doing is tying in, these are the commercials, this is the ROI, this is the onboarding process you're going through. Maybe I'll break that up, but it's just nice and clean in the deal management part to all have it as one block.
And I guess at the point at which they've given you let's just call it that strategic objective that they need to increase by 5%. If you don't necessarily have that figure to hand, obviously you can go away, look at data in terms of internally and say, right, of all of our most successful accounts or our top, adopters, how have they positively impacted that particular figure? Note it down, and then you can use it again the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that every company's ROI matrix will really come from the value that you're already delivering customers. And I think luckily at Salesloft, we've got a Forrester report of, the total economic impact of Salesloft, which a lot of our figures in our ROI will be baked out of. So it will be like, okay, these are your metrics based on the average results of customers. This is what we see as the achievable goals for you to get to, but we've tied in adoption. Because of course, I think sometimes with the ROI stuff, if we're like, oh yeah, you're going to create this many opportunities outside of 1 month of adopting Salesloft, it's not really going to happen, right? You're going to have to build everything out, onboard, train the sales reps. You're really going to see the value in the next 9 to 12 months after the first 3-month period.
Now, in terms of that ROI and commercials, again, do you have a set timeline that you want to try and stick by? I appreciate there could be some negotiation involved back and forth in terms of the commercial side of things, but is there a time frame that sort of tends to work well in terms of keeping it moving along?
Not really. I think it depends deal to deal, really, like how tied they are. My market is incredibly competitive. There's lots of providers all vying for very similar businesses in tech, and a lot of the time, it does, like especially at the moment, come down to fees and commercials. So quite a lot of the time towards the end of at the beginning of the process, you're going to give some initial fees, right, about how much Salesloft is going to cost, and then towards the end of the process, you might be on 3 calls negotiating the final contract. I'm sure it's probably the same for everyone else, really. But once you've locked that down, you're trying to convince the buyer that it's a good time to get your contract into their legal team. Quite a lot of the time you get pushback because they're like, right, we need to decide how much we're going to pay before we're happy to start doing red lines on the contract.
But then, like you said, if you've done the in-depth discovery and you've gone through the ROI and commercials, there's almost a way that you're able to go back to them and say, look, per month you could be losing out on X in terms of more revenue or faster deal cycles, whatever that is. So you're able to actually give a cost of not progressing with the deal.
That's the most important thing at the moment. And I would really recommend people trying to drive that rather than, hey, our software makes you X amount of money. It's what is the cost of not doing something. But try and bring that across, be like, and importantly, based on their own figures that you've managed to get throughout the discovery process or the whole deal process. Hey, based on what you've told us, the cost of you not doing something now is X. Like, are you sure you want to push this back? Like, am I right in thinking that you wanted to onboard in September, let's say? And I think you can just always tie the urgency to that. And, you're not lying. It's what they've told you, right, about what their goals are trying to get to. So I think that's an important thing. I think generally when you're getting to the commercial stages of the thing, you've really got someone that's going to probably buy you or someone else outside of maybe some crazy thing happening at their company that might put the deal to the status quo. So I think if you're getting to commercial negotiations, you're always trying to drive urgency, and the deal's probably going to happen fairly quickly after that.
And as you said, if you've got a hypothetical implementation date from the earlier stages of the deal, then at the end of the day, you're trying your hardest to meet the date that they've given you. So it's in their best interest to, move it along and, work with you, go back and forth and whatever. You touched on it there, but post ROI and commercials, moving on to legal and security review. So tips. I think everyone's sales reps talking about legal and security is like one of the biggest frustrations, I guess, sticking points potentially for some companies as well. So how have you found it best in terms of handling that? Do you bring someone in to help give a bit more confidence in terms of like someone from legal or security?
Yeah, I think the important part here is something we haven't actually touched on yet, is that in the scenario that we've talked about, we're really coaching almost a hypothetical buyer that's not bought Salesloft before. So it's like, these are the processes you're going on. Best case scenario, the buyer that you're selling to has bought software, so they can really coach you in. And I think this is like a really critical point when we get to the paper process, where you really need to coach like the buyer what happens. Hey, do you have an in-house legal team or is it outsourced? That's definitely something that I've been burnt from me before, because outsourced legal teams potentially don't have the same, speed that the in-house ones do. I think importantly as well is trying to get your buyer, if they haven't bought software before, what does the legal process look like? Can you go and speak to one of your colleagues when you've bought software before? How long has that taken? What does the business care about? Who do we need to connect to? And I'll try and actively to connect my EMEA legal counsel to theirs as quickly as possible, because I want them speaking rather than it just coming through. And we use a really good platform internally called Ironclad, which helps us do all of our contract management. It's really good platform.
So I was going to say, I've heard some horror stories of the outsourced legal where it's like, yeah, no worries, we'll aim to go back to you in like 4 to 6 weeks, and you're like, what? Sorry, 4 to 6 weeks? Are you having me on? Yeah, I've heard some horror stories there, but I've not heard of Ironclad. But then I work in marketing, not sales, so that's probably why I haven't heard of it.
But I've got some great questions, and this is something we've got through. I've like pulled them up here based on other like podcasts that I've done. It's basically what we've talked about. Who is the person responsible for approving contracts internally or redlining contracts? How intense is your legal and security process? Can you go and speak to other stakeholders at Selligence that have bought software before that can gain transparency for you? This is the natural process. I'm going to send over these documents. In your experience, how long does each stage take when things need to happen? I think importantly as well, what we're always trying to do in a sales process is tie buying whatever to a critical event, right? I think when I don't have a critical event in deals, that's a big red flag. So I think that can also help drive urgency when we get to the paper process as well.
Critical event being, they have to hit a target.
By Y, yeah, we need to launch this new product. We have this big marketing event. You're always trying and drive it. Okay, you told me this, so we need to, based on that, you're working back the deal process, really, aren't you? Like, okay, based on that critical event, you need to start Salesloft onboarding here. We need to sign the contract by here. We need to have gone through these stages by Y.
Yeah, it's that sense of urgency, which everyone, talks about in marketing as well. Fear of missing out. Like, are you going to miss that goal? That's what we're here to do, and that's what we're trying to help you with, etc. So, okay, then. So, legal and security, you've ticked that box, and then we're moving through to finalizing the partnership and onboarding. So, is there an art to making that as smooth as possible in your experience, and making sure that handover process basically puts that account in good stead with client success, if you have a client success team, of course?
Yeah, there is. I think it's always worth making sure that you've got resources deployed, and you've as well, part of potentially your process is connecting your buyer with the onboarding or implementation consultant, so it's a familiar face rather than just being handed over to them. But also, of course, hopefully by this stage, the economic buyer has been well engaged throughout the process. So you'd be working with them to get the contract signed. And you need to make sure that, they have complete visibility, or they understand what the process is going to look like from them buying the software to what their first, second and third week of onboarding is going to look like.
And this is actually another reason why, or reason for, argument for getting that head of CS or CS manager involved earlier on, maybe even if it's just one call that they've had, but just to introduce themselves and say, look, this is how we would onboard you. And then at the point at which you get to the onboard, it's like, oh, great to connect again. As we said on the first call, this is what we're going to run through. And they feel a lot more at ease because they have some degree of relationship.
Definitely. And it's another great way of multi-threading, right? Hey, I noticed that you have a head of customer success. Like, we're at the stage now, or, it could be a bit pre that. Like, let's connect our head of customer success. I think there's a great way that they can, and you could get them to sell the use cases of how they do it. Like, I know from my podcast before, my friend Laura, what she does is she sells like marketing software. So a lot of the time she'll connect her CMO to the CMO so they can have a CMO discussion about how they use the software.
Yeah, that's a nice idea. Actually, I've not. Like, at the end of the day, why wouldn't you?
Yeah,
because they're going to be one of the strongest advocates, because there's that mutual respect of you're also a CMO, and if it does help you in that way, and the figures or the results you're giving me sound great, then okay, I think that high flying CMO's using it. Maybe we should as well.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of like best practices and takeaways, there was something that you spoke about previously, which was building your internal brand, which you were sort of big on. And it's not necessarily internal brand that people might be thinking of, branding in the sense of, look at me, this is who I am. It's more in your wider business. It's that relationship building internally, isn't it? So do you want to just run through like your principles, your beliefs, and like how you work on that?
Massively so. And I think this is like a key differentiator between what I see A reps do and B reps do. I think like A reps and A star reps, if we were to categorize them, will never sell alone. They'll be the ultimate project managers, bringing in the best resources internally for them to sell deals. Now, you're only going to know about those resources or be able to leverage them if you've built really strong internal relationships with those specific people. And what I think would be my bugbear when I was thinking about this, if I was in legal or if I was in customer success and I suddenly got a random message from an Abe at the end of the quarter being like, hey, you need to jump on this, you need to do this for me, without any relationship. Whereas, if you've gone out of your way, if you've been like, hey, I'm Jack, I'm an AE here, like, do you want to grab lunch? We go and grab a coffee with like your legal team, customer success, onboarding, you're never going to be the stranger. And most of the time we're asking for it, right? We're asking for their time to help us in one deal or multiple deals. So try and build your internal branding relationship. Go and ask like to take people out for lunch. Go and ask to, hey, can we have a coffee? Hey, can we have a one-to-one? I'd love to understand more about how you support customers, like what your role involves. And then most of the time, everyone's a human being at the end of the day. And as an example, let's say I'm asking for red lines at the end of the quarter and it goes in the queue. But I've built a great relationship with my head of legal. I know personal stuff about them. We can banter a bit over Slack. Like, I've taken them out for coffee. Where do you think they're going to prioritize mine versus the AE that's never spoken to them before, that every end of quarter will just throw something at the end of the day, being like, you need to get this done in the next 2 hours? They're going to come to me, aren't they? Like, it's just what happens. Humans are like that. So I think it's a critical part of being an effective project manager and being an effective AE is building a really strong internal brand and connecting with as many people as possible. You don't need to build that brand by being the number one top of the leaderboard every single time. Like, you can do it by just being a nice person and speaking to other people as much as possible.
Yeah, and I guess what we're saying is essentially don't be a selfish salesperson. Like, it's there are a lot more people involved in bringing customers on, managing those customers, helping those customers succeed, than just your role in getting to the top of that biller's leaderboard. And as well as, like you said, the marketing side of things, marketing are trying their best to bring you inbound leads. So we've spoken about previously that the better your relationship with marketing, chances are the more inbound leads you're going to get and the higher quality of those inbound leads. So at the end of the day, it's like you said, it's only going to help you. So it's in your best interest to invest time into that relationship building.
Yeah. And I think as well, something that I did early on in my career at Salesloft is I was just a yes man. Like, anytime anyone had any request in any department, I'd be like, yeah, I'll do that. And I think it really ended up paying its dividends by doing that early on in like Salesloft when I originally joined, because then people like, oh, Jack did that for me, I'm going to do that for him. it wasn't even a subconscious thing. I just like, I think I actively wanted to do that as like, I think it's just my character anyway. But, you know, I'm really happy that I did do that. And when that Slack message came in from a random department going, hey, can someone do this? Or can someone help support me on this? Just say yes, because you never know when potentially that could come and benefit you as well in the future.
Yeah, it's that whole like pay it forward or the butterfly effect, isn't it? Like you don't know how valuable just help giving someone 5 minutes of your time to feedback on something could be 6 months down the line when you really need something to get across the line. And oh, actually, the person you helped was the person you need help with now, and you can't go into this thinking I want something back if I'm giving you something. You've just got to put the effort in, and it will, you know, what goes around comes around, sort of thing.
100%. Big believer in that.
Yeah, I think that was one of the biggest takeaways from our kickoff call. I've said this to you that we typically do a write up after, so I think that's going to be a nice section of the blog there in terms of like not being a selfish sales rep and stuff. So, in terms of like, because we've run through that process now in terms of, you know, onboarding and kickoff and things. Are you involved in that onboarding and kickoff, and do you maintain a relationship with that account at the point at which they're handed over?
Good question. Yeah. So for us in the London team at Salesloft, in the commercial and even in the enterprise team, we have a great synergy or process, because not only do we get to, you know, take the buyer through the buying process, but also however long they determine to commit to Salesloft in that initial contract, be it 1, 2, or 3 years, we remain as your account manager. So it has this beauty of being like, I understand everything about the business, I understand what they're trying to achieve, the challenges we're going to overcome. Of course, I'm going to hand them over to onboarding and implementation, because I'm not the most technical person in the world, but the other guys will be, to help them succeed. But I will be following that customer throughout their Salesloft journey. And as well, I've built a great relationship with them. So, you know, I'm going to be the one that they can turn to for any best practices. Lucky at Salesloft, you know, I've been here for 4 years, so I can be like, this is how I used it as an SDR. This is how I used it as an AE, which is quite transferable and lucky for me. I know a lot of reps won't actually use their software as they do in their day-to-day life. But yeah, I think it creates a better buying experience, and you can really trust people come across the consultant. And as well, you're not just trying to flog deals for the sake of flogging deals, or you actually care about the customer. And you know, if you misadvertently sell something that doesn't necessarily work, or roadmap, like, you are the one managing the account. Like, it comes back to you.
And you're saying you would maintain that relationship for the full term, or
for the full term.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've had quite a few conversations, and I think where my head is from an outsider's perspective is I think it just makes sense, right? It encourages better culture in terms of your sales team, for them to think, well, I'm going to be stuck with this customer if I miss-sell something for the next year. So it's probably best I don't, because that's going to be very, very awkward, and it's not going to look great when we get an early cancellation, or you know, they don't pay, essentially. Because let's be honest, it's more frequent than people would like to admit that, you know, customers just don't pay because they feel like they've been missold or something.
And the important thing as well is like, you're tied then as the account manager to that success. And of course, like, the good thing about being an account manager is I've understood everything about their business. I know how it works, what they're trying to achieve. I don't have to they don't have to then build a great relationship with me, and I go, yeah, see you later, nice one. Like, I've handed over the notes to the account manager, and then the account manager almost has to do discovery again with the buyer, and it's like, it's a more disjointed process, let's say. Straight from when they sign. I think eventually they can go into an account management team when Salesloft is like fully deployed over, let's say, minimum a year period. Then it's like, okay, cool, we've made sure you're up and running, you're renewing, you're committed, Salesloft's working. Now you're going to go to an account management team inside of Salesloft. But I think, like, you know, it's also, for me as a salesperson, is we of course will get the upgrades of licenses if they're successful. So, you know, let's say hypothetically that someone signs up with Salesloft and they have 10 users. The more successful they are at building opportunities and generating revenue, they're going to hire more salespeople, which then I would get the revenue of them being successful.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that question actually. Are you rewarded for renewals and upsells?
Yeah, upsells, yeah, not renewals.
Cool. Yeah, because I think that seems to be a big one of the bigger challenges of essentially maybe it's more old school companies where the sales reps are not actually rewarded in any way, shape, or form for that customer actually doing well. And I think obviously that sales reps are sales reps. The sales industry is what it is. They essentially their whole pay package of things are tied to commissions and things like that. So yeah, an interesting one to try and get leadership to buy into that. But like you said, it makes sense for everyone because if the account does well, you get upsells. Great, it's great for the whole business, and there is enough money to go around that you can get a little kickback.
Yeah.
With
And
the
for me,
upsell.
quite a lot of the time, like in the past couple of years, like, maybe they would just buy for the SDR team. And then I've got a great opportunity and account management is very much similar to sales. And I think early on when I was an account manager at Salesloft, they'd be like, okay, well, I've sold the new business deal. They'll obviously just add on all of the customer success team and AEs like in a couple of months, like they told me they would. Whereas really as an account manager as well, you need to think of that like a new business deal. Like same again, what are the strategies? What are the initiatives? What are the challenges? What's the ROI? What's the cost of inaction on that team? It's exactly the same. And it's also a really fun process to do both new business where they don't use it and also be on the other side to be like, okay, well, Salesloft embedded, I can actually report back what the successes are, and then we can deploy across different teams as well.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
I was
really
speaking to a guy called Luke last week, and he said it's the same for him. He's managing the account throughout as well, and he said it was almost he didn't think he'd enjoy that part of it as much because he was like he thought he enjoyed the hunt, of the sales process, but he actually gets more reward in terms of like self-worth in when the customer does well and they renew or upsell. He finds that more enjoyable in terms of the buzz than actually closing the initial deal, because there's always ways you can close a deal and always ways you can phrase things and whatever, and at the end of the day they haven't embedded it, used it, so they do have a more glossy view of what it could look like. Do you find that as well, like you get almost more sense of fulfillment when you see the upsell and the success? You can be honest, like if
I think I'm like, if I had to choose to be an account manager and just do new business, I would choose new business 100% of the time. I think it's just where I naturally really prefer. I really like building. I don't know. It's hard to do. I think people are either one or the other. They're going to prefer what I prefer new business. I don't know what it is. It's like, the thrill of selling the new business deal is for me more gratifying.
And there was a separate conversation that I've had in the past where someone in CS, basically, some people see CS as like basically client support, not client success. And it's like they were saying actually the best customer success reps and managers have previously worked in sales.
Interesting.
Because I think there was, in this particular case, there was a head of that basically said, "Oh no, they're not going to cut it in sales during the interview process. How about we chuck them into customer success?" And it was like, why do you think that they're not cut out for sales, but they're fine for customer success? Why is customer success not seen as hardcore as sales? And it was the belief that someone who's good at sales would be good at customer success and vice versa. Not that customer success is like a lesser role, or an account manager is a lesser role than new business sales.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think customer success more and more is going to become more important when people are way more focused on net retention rather than just like getting these massive funding rounds and just growing at any cost possible. Like growth is not going to be what it was before. We're not going to see like 100 or 150% growth. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, that's been it's been a great chat to run through that deal process, and hopefully in running through that, those listening might be able to take some tips and tricks and go and work on their internal brand, whatever it might be. So appreciate you jumping on to run us through that. Before I let you go, podcast and nominate. Who do we need to get onto the podcast next, and why? We've already got Tom coming on, so can't say Tom. But who do we need to get on, and why?
What type of things do you want to talk about?
Purely sales. So who in sales do we need to get on the podcast next? Whether that's an SDR, an AE, a head of.
I would get Ollie Sharp.
Ollie Sharp. Whereabouts is Ollie
VP of
working at the
sales at
minute?
Abacum. He was like my first boss at Salesloft. I think you're gonna have a great conversation with him about like driving culture in sales teams and building. He was at LinkedIn before, built out that team at Salesloft, built out that team. I think you'll have a great conversation, a unique conversation, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that actually, to be fair, we're probably a little bit light on the heads of and VPs and things, so it could be a good to mix it up a bit. But perfect. All right. Well, we'll sync up after, and I'll hopefully get you to make the intro for me, do all the work, and get him on the podcast. Like I said, I appreciate you jumping on and taking the time. We are got 1 minute left of our hard stop, so we timed that perfectly. Hopefully it's been a useful and enjoyable episode for those listening. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, whatever you want to call it, and please leave a review if you value the episodes. It really does help. But we will see you in the next episode, so thanks again, Jack.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. See you later, everyone.